This episode of the Leap Forward podcast is brought to you by Bridge LT, leaders in conversational learning and innovation. Through AI role plays, technical simulators, and comprehensive training programs, Bridge LT is revolutionizing the future of corporate and enterprise education.
In this episode of Leap Forward, Rebecca Martin discusses her extensive experience, starting with 20 years at Ford Motor Company, where she worked in key areas including sales, marketing and finance, both in Australia and internationally. She offers her thoughts on leadership, career development and navigating global markets, making this episode a must-watch for aspiring leaders and automotive professionals. I'm absolutely delighted to be joined here on the Bridge Leap Forward podcast series by Rebecca Martin. Rebecca, you're joining us from a little far away today. Welcome.
Thank you.
Where in the world do we find you?
I am in Sydney, Australia, and it is early in the morning here. Maybe not so early now, but early for me, shall I say.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. You have an incredible career, and we're really delighted to be able to spend some time with you. Kicking that off, I would love to just hear a little bit about your journey to date.
Sure. So probably all stemmed from working in the family business, which was in pet supplies and pet shops, not in cars. And I didn't have a natural bent for cars, shall we say. But working in the business was it gave me a lot of good grounding and foundation in business. And when I got to about finishing uni, my dad said, "Oh, do you want to come and work in the business?" And I thought, no, probably go, pave my own way. So decided to go into corporate and was fortunate enough to get onto the graduate program for Ford Australia, which gave me a great grounding, gave me lots of different experiences in terms of career. So you moved around for the first 4 years of the graduate program. I started in finance, which surprises everybody. I've got an accounting degree. And after working in finance for 4 years, decided that, I thought I'd probably wasn't going to be a finance person for the rest of my life, which I never regret knowing finance because it helps in every aspect of business. But decided that I either want to be in sales and marketing or HR. And I was very fortunate to have a mentor who helped me decide which career path to take. And I think it's one of those things throughout life. I've always encouraged people to see if they can find themselves good mentors that can challenge them and not just agree with whatever path you want to take or whatever challenge you think you want to take on. So I moved to sales and marketing and went through doing distribution type jobs in head office and then moved to the regional offices working with the Ford dealers, which was great. I still say to this day, one of the best jobs I ever had was being a dealer operations manager, driving around and having responsibility for 8 dealerships. It was probably the best job I've ever had. Then I moved to, that was in Sydney. Then I moved to Adelaide and became the first female regional manager for Ford Motor Company, which was interesting at a young age, but it gave me another really good lesson, which was, if you can build relationships and establish credibility, I think pretty much you can do anything. So I was in Adelaide and then moved from Adelaide to Detroit, which...
So just a small move there.
Just a little
So
move.
come on, tell us how that all came about.
So this is an interesting thing because it was only later in life I found out how I actually got onto that program. But there was a program that Ford was starting to run called the Executive Partnering Program. And essentially what they did was selected 3 people from around the world, Ford World, to go to Detroit and shadow the senior leaders of the business. So shadowing people like Jack Nasser, Bob Rui, David Thursfield, Richard Parry, who was head of design. So getting a really can I say at that time, scary, scary experience, but amazing experience in terms of seeing how senior people run the business, make decisions, which has held me in good stead for the future leadership positions, but also for my career now in exec coaching and leadership training. So that was just an amazing experience for 8 weeks. And then
give me a highlight.
a highlight. Oh,
Yeah.
there's so many highlights. Probably not PC these days, but we went on. They told us we had to be at the company hangar, and they couldn't tell us where we were going. But we went to London, the UK. And I thought, oh, no, I got on the plane and they said, you're going to be on the plane with Jack Nasser, Bob Brewy. There was like 4 senior execs on each plane. And I thought, all I kept thinking was, oh my God, I'm going to have to sound intelligent for 7 hours between Detroit and London. Anyway, so we actually ended up, Ford owned Jaguar at the time, and we went to London to one of the Jaguar launches. So it was an amazing experience. But probably the real highlight was going to Washington, D.C. for a similar Jaguar launch. And this is another lesson in life. Throughout my career, I've been told, oh, you'll hate working for this person when you go, you move roles. And so someone had told me that Bob Brewy, who was the group vice president for marketing and sales for Ford, that he was an ogre and, he was terrible. He's always grumpy. Anyway, so he and I were going by ourselves to Washington, D.C. to this Jaguar launch. And again, I thought, oh, God, I'm going to have to sound intelligent for the flight. Anyway, as it turns out, you never judge these people. You go in with open eyes and they're just people. So pretty much on the whole flight, we talked about his grandkids, life, me coming from Australia. And then when we were in Washington, D.C., he took me on a private tour of the Smithsonian Institute, which is, I thought, for someone at his level to actually take the time to do that. So again, it's one of those lessons, always look after your people, care for your people in business. From a business perspective, one of the lessons I learned, apart from all the fun that we were having, was we were in a meeting one day, and it was about the senior leadership team from Ford Brazil had come up, and they had to justify, it was hyperinflation in Brazil. They weren't making any money. Basically, they were hemorrhaging. So they had come up, the leadership team come up and were explaining or justifying why they should stay open and Ford shouldn't shut in Brazil. And myself and the 2 executive partners were in the room, and you've got sort of like what looked like the United Nations conference room. This team presenting, and then Jack Nasser is, facilitating a discussion with the senior leaders. And then he turns around and he says, Rebecca, what do you think we should do? And I was like, what? You're asking some chick from Australia who doesn't even know what's going on here. What? Anyway, it was a technique that I think in business is so useful. Jack was a master at getting different perspectives on a problem. And it didn't matter where that perspective was coming from, but it was another input to help make decisions. And I have always remembered that and thought about that. Getting perspectives from different people that aren't necessarily involved in your problem can be really useful. So that was probably there's a few highlights there, but yeah, some of the highlights from that amazing 8 weeks.
It's incredible. And what it makes me think about is, how, Ford built such an incredible business by the way it approached its talent and talent development. I mean, to come from a graduate kind of program to have that sort of opportunity. Tell me more about that.
The way that they look after their talent. Yes, I think that they were very creative in working out ways to challenge talent. When I first joined Ford, I was astounded, and that was a long time ago, by the way. I can't speak for what they do now, but when I first started, I remember thinking, so we always had a day a month as a graduate group to get together. alongside that, they had all of this other training that we could always go to. And I just always felt like there was this air of learning at Ford, to the point where they paid for my master's. Like, I did a master's in business admin, and Ford encouraged that, sponsored that as well. So I've actually got a lot to thank them for now I think about it. But again, a group of 20 people that they sponsored, and it helped with the networking in the business. And this is actually another really, really good thing that I've learned. And when I develop leadership programs, it's one of the things that I encourage the businesses: select your people to go on this program from all the different areas of the business. So, for example, I run leadership programs in aged care, and what I encourage them to do is have people from dining, people from allied health, people from, people and culture, people from finance, because what happens then is you create this network within the organization. And that's one of the things I found. Once I started I was on the graduate program, had a network, did these other training things. You build a bigger network, MBA, bigger network, move around. I mean, it's just essential in organizations to have that network, because it makes stuff so much easier to get done, particularly when you've got good relationships. So I think Ford were very forward in their training and development of people in lots of different ways, if you wanted to take the opportunity. I think that's the other thing. A lot of people often will be like, oh, I don't really think that's for me, or I shouldn't do that. But I think, if you're open to taking the opportunity and you're curious, then they were very forward in making sure that there was a lot of training and development to retain people. There was a very high retention in the time that I worked there. Particularly in sales and marketing, very high I mean, we did have some periods of redundancy. Unfortunately, it was a challenging business environment. But for those that, because I was there for 20 years, some of the colleagues I worked with are still there. So, a long career, long careers at Ford, which is good. Yeah, a very a dynamic, challenging environment that would foster learning. Yeah.
And just building on that sort of dynamic and challenging environment, you obviously worked with some, for an iconic business like Ford, you worked with a number of iconic individuals, leaders, in that business. You've experienced kind of operating in different markets. I mean, you talked about Brazil, you talked about London, obviously Australia, spending that time in the States. And I guess along with that, the Ford business itself, you mentioned the word challenging, but it was going through an incredible phase as well. Jaguar Land Rover that you mentioned, Volvo, and so forth, and so that must have been one heck of a learning curve for you.
Yeah, it was interesting, because after the executive partnering program, I thought I was going back to Australia. Apparently not. So then I ended up staying there. They asked me to stay to head up their product and brand marketing area for a new car they were bringing out. And it was an interesting time, because that was the whole premise of this new car. Was we had bought Volvo, and we were going to do the first aluminum, I have to say, aluminium frame. And that was interesting, because we'd only just bought Volvo, and then we were trying to use their people. So we were trying to get this blended team. And there's another learning, right, in life, is that later in life, when I've been involved in some mergers and acquisitions, it's just not that easy. So you had, first of all, you had people from Volvo that thought that the way that Ford talked, and had taken over Volvo. And so you've got immediately people that have probably, like, me at Ford, who've invested their whole life in this company, that all of a sudden there's these people saying, well, you're part of Ford now and you have to do it this way. So there were the challenges of that sort of that merger, if you like, I'll call it, and the way the relationship worked, and I always think about it this way, like, how do you create, in any of those situations, how do you create that network of allies and collaborate well to get the best outcome? And in hindsight, we probably could have done better because it was Ford's very, very process oriented, which I love. Uh, they allow innovation in that, but there's processes you follow, and that's a hard thing for someone from another company to come in and have to follow this, what they might have perceived as a very rigid process. So yeah, just that purchase of Volvo was interesting because I was at the forefront of trying to, in that particular team, trying to help make the team as collaborative as possible to get the best outcome. And we probably didn't because that car no longer exists. So probably not the best. But another interesting thing at that time was there was this is terrible of me. I said at the time, I go, oh God, it's like with those car companies, it's like, I got a bigger bank account than yours. I'm just going to go and buy another company, right? Because they were all just buying up all these companies, which from a strategic point of view didn't, I presume they thought it made sense, but it didn't appear that way. But there was a guy at Ford, and this is where I sort of got my love for brands. There was a guy at Ford called Jim Schreier, and at this stage, Ford had like 7 brands, right? And he did this event in Detroit, and we all went to this event. And it was he talked, or the event was about how each of the brands, they had to retain their uniqueness. So Ford was Ford, Jaguar, and it was all about the difference in the materials in the car and how that brand would be portrayed in the marketplace, how their people would portray the brand. So that to me was a really interesting era of how you could try to have a house of brands but still have the overarching Ford Motor Company. And as we know, that is not how it all ended up, because Alan Mullally came in, rightly so, and was like, this is all about the Ford Oval, and then divested everything to get back to the core business, which is obviously was obviously a very good decision. So yeah, so some really interesting aspects of that time where Ford was
Mhm.
acquiring. Mm.
And where are we now in your career at this point?
so
Or
so
where are you in the world, in fact?
no, come on, Justin, come with me. Yeah, so I left Ford 12, actually, 16 years ago. And primarily because my husband lived in Sydney. So my husband and I commuted between Melbourne and Sydney for 8 years. So he lived in Sydney and I lived in Melbourne. As we like to say, we were Qantas's number one fan club. we bankrolled them at the time. Yeah, and I think at times, I loved working for Ford. I loved my career there. I loved working for Alan. When Alan Mullally came to Australia, I was actually thinking about leaving, and that was 2 years before I actually left. And just listening to him speak, I was like, "Oh my God, I have to stay and work for this man. He's amazing." Yeah, it was literally that. Like, you've got me in the heart again. I'm, in it. And primarily, the only reason I wanted to leave was because I actually wanted to live with my husband. Strangely enough. So, so I spent another couple of years, and I was in the sales role at the time, and then moved to the head of marketing role at Ford. So I spent a couple of years doing that, and then moved to to Sydney, to be with my husband. And when I moved to Sydney, I didn't know what I was going to do. Like, I literally just quit, which people couldn't understand. They thought, you must be going to something. Well, I'd worked at 100 miles an hour, probably 110 miles an hour, for like 20 something years. And I thought, okay, I'm just going to take a little break. Well, that lasted, as my husband said, that lasted 2 months. January and February, which is summer here. So January, summer, and February, we traveled overseas. So I got back, and I was fortunate enough to be contacted by one of the novated leasing companies that I had done business with through my role as sales head of sales for Ford. And he said, "Oh, I heard that you're in Sydney and free. We've got a business idea with Macquarie Bank." And I thought, right. And he said, "Oh, we just need someone to do the business plan and, think about it." And I was like, "Oh, yeah, all right." Okay. So he said, "Can you meet with the head of Macquarie Leasing?" And I said, "Sure, no worries." So I met him, and then it turned out I was just supposed to be writing the business plan for the year, doing a bit of exploratory work, presented it to them. They loved it. They went to Nicholas Moore, who was the CEO of Macquarie Bank at the time. He approved it. And the concept was that would be like a concierge business for customers, because as we know, it's a lot of customers that really don't like going to the dealership. They don't like, the haggle. I'm one of those people, and I worked in the industry. And so the idea behind this was that it was a concierge service for customers, but it was the distribution channel was through Macquarie's mortgage brokers, because they had third-party brokers were their only channel. And basically what they wanted them to do is to write the finance. So as their customer, they would send it to the concierge. Concierge would handle it with the dealer, and they would write the finance. So I set that business up. So that was where I got a bit of experience in a startup. So the beauty of that is you can start it up with someone else's money, which is both exciting and scary at the same time, because part of me thought, am I institutionalized into the corporate Ford way? As it turns out, Justin, working in the family business, I apparently am a little bit entrepreneurial, so it kicked back in. So, and they were great. They literally just said, "Here's a 7-figure sum of money. You go sort it out, and you just come and report to the board the board of Macquarie Leasing of this joint venture each month." So that taught me a lot of valuable lessons. So basically we set everything up. We set office up, hired staff, developed the system, the platform at the time, which I look back now and I just think, when you look at platforms now and you just think, oh my gosh, they look so slick. This looked, at the time it was very modern, but now I look back on some of the screenshots and think, oh my God, it's so pedestrian and, old. But it gave us a really good grounding. We went out and we recruited, so we got dealer agreements. So again, my background comes in. So dealer agreements with every franchise in every capital city. And we set up this business. So again, probably taught me a lot on reflection, about things I should have delegated, which is one of the things I coach on. But what that did teach me was that I could set up a business and I could motivate my staff. I could, report to the board. And so there were lots of things I learnt that I didn't know before. And so did that for 3 years. And then the Macquarie Leasing wanted that business. Oh, this is what happened. That's right. Macquarie Leasing bought the Ford credit book, and they bought the GM book down here. So they've bought like $6 billion worth of book. And they'd always gone through third-party providers. And so all of a sudden they had all of these customers that they would have to go direct to. And so it totally changed their distribution model. And then as part of that plan, it made sense for our business to go into the bank, because they could use it going direct instead of sending it to us. And they said to me, would you like to come in and run it? To which I politely declined because, again, I think the learning of being able to set up your own business and do your own thing, I just thought, I don't think I can go back to corporate. So that then led me to, I thought altruistically it would be so nice to help small businesses with the knowledge that I've gained. Then one thing I learnt was that very small businesses don't have much money, and they don't really pay you. So I would be doing that as a charity, and that probably wasn't going to work. So at the same time, my husband and I bought into a pub. So I spent quite a bit of time at the pub, not drinking. Well, I did spend quite a bit of time at the back end of the day drinking, but again, spent quite a bit of time with the publican, using my skill to help him further the business. So I used the marketing, did partnerships with, theatres, and so drove traffic as well as looked at the financials, worked out what the margins were, because hospitality is a very tight margin business. So it gave me a lot of experience in hospitality, which has been very interesting as well. So following that, or during that maybe, my neighbour said, "Oh, you would actually be quite good at coaching." And I said, "Okay, whatever." Anyway, long story short, decided that, I would be interested in that. So I did a certificate in advanced coaching psychology, which was great. It gave me some really interesting tools, and started the business. So specialise in exec coaching. So exec coaching, leadership training, pretty much, and business coaching, and pretty much anything that helps businesses create a shift is what I love doing. It's, working with businesses to work out how they can improve and be better, because most of the businesses I work with across a range of industries, that's all they want. They either want better leaders, they want, someone to have a look at their business and say, is it, could the processes be improved? Or, is the structure right? Or they've got growth aspirations. So so my passion at the moment is just working with these great businesses to work out how we can make them even better.
What a phenomenal journey, and I can see the parallels and the links to everything you've done previously to where you are now and what you're doing now. Talking about that and looking across that career, how has do you feel the market changed? How does leadership and management changed over time?
Interesting. I don't think it has changed. I think, I think leadership and management, sort of like, I always think about it on this continuum, right? So there's things that you do that you manage. So you manage performance, you manage whether it's your people performance or your business performance. And then on the leadership side, you want to inspire and motivate and, create value. So I think a lot of those, I think both of those have stayed the same. I think there's better understanding. So the days of, say the vice president walking along and no one wanting to speak to them, or those days have gone. I think it's about, I always think of leadership and management as being simple, but it's not. So what I mean by that is, I think if you're a leader and you say you're running a business and you listen to your people and your employees, your customers, your stakeholders, you actually listen to them. You don't just pretend to listen to them, or you don't just read the latest survey that you did. You actually talk to them and listen to them. And you can put things in place and add value in the business by doing that. So I think that's where there may have been a shift. I was probably fortunate to work for people that did actually listen and take that in. So I think that's one of the things I was saying I learnt from, Jack, and there were a number of leaders in Ford Australia that did that. But I think definitely if leaders listen and they act on that listening, that's, I think that's where leadership and management can be at its best. And I've seen some fantastic examples of that just create, and they don't have to be wholesale shifts. So, for example, I work with a great construction group, and this is probably the most simple example of listening, taking action to engage your people. We ran these sort of like team sessions, and one of the pieces of feedback was that, and they had taken over this business, to put it into context, so it wasn't just a random. And they ran these sessions, and their production staff said, well, it gets pretty hot in the factory. It would be good if we could have singlets instead of these polo shirts. So they got them singlets. There's still all the safety around it, but they got them singlets. Like, it wasn't hard. But they've been saying it apparently for years and no one had done anything. So that's the most simple example I can give you, where you can actually make a big difference to engaging your people, like making them think they work at a place that is great. So I think from a leadership perspective, sometimes we think it's all the big things we have to do that are going to make the difference, but often it's some of the little things that you can do to really make sure that your people want to stay with you. Same applies to customers, right? It's like in business, it astounds me how many people don't listen to their customers, or they justify it away. So they get a range of, complaints, and they justify why that complaint exists. It's like, no, think about the root cause. Is there something you can do in your business to make it better for the customer? So definitely listening is, I think, one of the key things from a leadership and management point of view.
And what about communications? Because the medium, I mean, we are talking over the wire on opposite ends of the earth. How has media and technology kind of changed leadership and leadership style, do you think?
Interesting. I think media plays an interesting role in businesses because you can put all the policies in place and all that sort of stuff, right? But if you lead your team well and demonstrate the values, and the values are valued in your business, whenever you're in the media or your team are in the media, and making them aware that they are a reflection of the brand, even in their personal life. Now, I know there's a lot of debate around that, but the reality is you work for an organization, then you're part of their brand. And so your social media is a reflection on that brand as well. So I think it's probably a lot harder now for leaders with media and accessibility to media. On the flip side, technology and media has made our lives so much easier. As you rightly point out, we're here chatting, right? So I know, for example, my business, I coach someone in Bermuda. I coach someone in New Zealand. I coach someone in the UK. It's like I just ran a workshop virtually for 20 people in Barcelona. It's like I could never have done that without the technology. So I think from a leadership point of view, that's exciting for businesses to be able to access, not necessarily someone like me, but you can access different people to help with your team and your leadership, which is, I think, a really interesting. It's a really interesting tool that businesses can use. So I think there's technology and media present us with great opportunities, but there's associated challenges with it as well. And so how you manage those challenges.
That's a great segue into my sort of next question around looking at the automotive industry and through the lens that you uniquely have, I suppose, in a sense. When you look at that, what challenges do you see the industry faces right now, and what does it need to do to overcome them?
Interesting. I look at the automotive industry, and I think one of the interesting things is what would make someone want to work in the automotive industry today. And I think there's huge, because it is such a dynamic, interesting industry, but I feel like we don't present it that way to the world. And I don't know whether it's through potentially some ambassadors that make it young people. Like, why would young people want it? I'll rephrase it. Someone like me, I love the industry, right? I'm sold. I don't work exclusively in automotive. I have some automotive clients, but I love there is something about it, right? It's got an energy. But if you're young, does it seem like a dynamic industry? You've got Tesla probably seemed dynamic and a disruptor, right? But is it, you've got a lot of brands in China, but you see here in Australia, essentially we're an importer. And so why would someone want to work in the automotive industry here as a young person? You've got that, I suppose, perception that, salespeople are pushy, and that's been tried to be changed. But, and this is a terrible thing to say, I hate going to dealerships. And I was a sales manager, right? It's like I wanted that experience to be amazing for people. I still hate going to a dealership because I feel like I'm just going to get sold. And so I think one of the challenges for the industry is, and I know, there's different models trying to flip that. But it is, how can you change that? I don't know, go back to how can salespeople listen better? How can they actually solve my problem rather than try and shove that car that they've got to get off the lot and they've got a, $3,000 incentive. Come on back, I'm going to get you a good deal. I don't want a deal. Well, I do want a deal, but that's not my primary goal. I want to know what car is going to solve my problem, because at the moment, nothing on the road. I'm actually looking for a car at the moment, so it's an interesting example. I haven't seen anything I like design-wise, but now I'm like, oh, okay, well, I've got to get a new car, so I'm just going to go and have a look. But am I going into a dealership? I don't want to go into a dealership because I know they're going to try and get me into whatever they need me to get into. I want someone to solve my problem. I've got dogs. I cart stuff. Like, tell me what is available in your range and show me what I would like to, what do you think I would that would solve my problems. But we don't operate that way, and I think there's an opportunity there for sure. And I think it's about how do we make the industry exciting for young people to enter? Like, what do they get out of being in the industry? I'll give you an example. Here in Australia, there's a young girl. I used to do some pro bono coaching for Career Trackers, which is an Indigenous internship program. And there was a lovely girl there that, this is years ago, she was like one of their rising stars, and she got an internship at Qantas. This woman now, she's a woman, and she loves aviation and is proactively, she's not paid, she's like an ambassador for aviation for young people. She's and she just posts all the time on LinkedIn about, how fantastic the aviation is. She gives you really great examples. And I always think, how could someone like that help the automotive industry? Because it's so interesting. We've got an engineering centre of excellence here in Australia that Ford put here in Asia Pacific. Why aren't we telling people about it? Why aren't we, everybody's trying to get young people into STEM. Well, here's an opportunity, but it seems like we don't advertise it in a proactive way. Not advertisers in, putting up billboards, but showing these kids that there's a great career path in automotive. And it doesn't just mean, on the showroom floor, or it could be in this engineering centre of excellence. There's so many other aligned. There's tech, right? Tech in automotive. That would be so interesting for young people, but I just don't think that they think that that's a career path. So I think there's a huge challenge for the automotive industry there. And it may be different in different countries, obviously. But yeah, I think that that's one of the challenges for automotive in terms of people, definitely. In terms of, I wonder where the industry is. I think the industry will go hybrid rather than electric. We're already seeing, changes in sales, but I just think the infrastructure for electric is not there, particularly in countries with big distances, so Australia and the US. The infrastructure is not there to support it. So if you, I was thinking of getting an electric car, but then I was like, oh God, no, what if I wanted to drive to Melbourne, which I've done, which is 800 Ks. And I always think I'm patient, Justin, but I'm not patient when it comes to just sitting there waiting for my car to charge. I even hate putting petrol in my car. It's like, just seems like a waste of that 5 minutes, So I think that's a challenge. Yeah.
And looking back, and as a woman entering this business, what advice would you give to you just talked there about the wonderful career trackers kind of story there. What advice would you give a woman, particularly kind of entering into this industry?
Yeah. It's such a dynamic industry, and there's always, every day was different. What advice would I give? It's a tough one, right? Because I had amazing young women working for me. I think that the dilemma is that for some of them, no, I suppose my advice would be take opportunities when they're presented to you, because they do get presented to you. For example, I could have easily said, I didn't want to go to Adelaide. Every time I moved throughout my career, I reckon I cried for the first 6 months at home, hated it. The thing I used to say to young people, men and women, is take those opportunities because A, living somewhere else is such a fantastic experience. I think it makes you more curious because you naturally like want to explore. You end up with a network again of business colleagues, but also great lifelong friends. And you learn so much more about the business than sitting in a head office. So yeah, there's things that I learnt moving around about Ford that when I came back to head office as the GM of sales, I think it enabled me to make better decisions on behalf of the company and the dealers because I had had that interstate experience and that overseas experience, because you're able to think a lot more broadly. And I used to say this when I was in the sales job, we go to the agency and they'd be talking about, the latest campaigns, blah, blah, blah. And I'd say, well, how are you going to get to the Sydney market though? Because Sydney's very different to Melbourne. It's like, 7 different villages or towns within a city, and they don't all cross. Whereas in Melbourne, you could put a billboard up on, either side of Melbourne at the time, and you'd be guaranteed of high traffic, where you can't do that in Sydney. And Sydney-siders were trapped in traffic. They couldn't watch the 6 o'clock news, so they couldn't see our ads. So I was always like, how are you going to get to that market, which I would never have said if I had not lived here. And so I think the benefit of taking the opportunities, moving around, really understanding your customers and where they come from, that would be my advice. Yeah, take the opportunities.
It's a great piece of advice. Lastly, you talked about hybrid being a kind of evolution from the sort of pure EV sort of concept. When you look forward, what can you see as coming next?
Interesting. So there's been a lot written about hydrogen, right? So I'm a bit of a cynic, which I probably shouldn't be, but in 1999, Ford were doing hydrogen tests on cars when I was living in Detroit. And I'm like, that's like 25 years ago. So this is always interesting when friends say to me, Tesla's amazing with electric, blah, blah, blah. Or when they talk about electric, and I'm like, the only reason car companies got off their ass and did anything about electric was because of Tesla. They could have done it before. They've all been testing the technology and doing it. But of course, a disruptor comes in, then they get off their butt. And so I don't know if hydrogen will be next. Hybrid will probably be I can't see in the bigger countries in the short term, because the governments won't embrace. I can't see full electric going quickly, unless there's a disruptor with hydrogen. I don't know. I think they'll all puddle along and do what they were doing with electric until you get a disruptor. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know what's next. I don't know the answer to that question. And I'm not really close enough to it, to be quite honest. I love reading about it, but yeah, I'm not really close enough to it. But that's my observation about the speed of the industry. Unless you do get someone from outside the industry challenging, which happens in every industry, right? It's like there's sort of a bit of a status quo. So yeah, I don't know. I'll just sit here and probably buy a hybrid though.
Well, listen, I really appreciate your time today. It's been a wonderful conversation. Thank you for joining us on Leap Forward, Rebecca Martin.
Thanks, Justin. It's been really fun. Thank you.